Alright, another kind of update episode, and I'm going to kind of call out these Nitro Gears. If you've been following my video series, you know that I had a hell of a time getting the rear crush washer to crush, but prior to that I had a hell of a time getting the damn pinion depth correct, and the depth wasn't too much of an issue. It was more the backlash because of the shim selection you get. It's just the smallest shim moving side to side was putting me either too loose or too tight, so I had to sit there and play around with the shims for quite a while just to get the backlash within spec, which was really turning into a pain in the ass. I mean, if I could have just had two, I believe they give you 5 thousandths is like the smallest. If they would have given you like a 2.5 thousandths, you know, two of those, that would have made things a whole lot easier. Let's see, I think I've updated. I do have the exhaust done. That's ready to be installed. The rear is done. I got my new cover, haven't put it on yet to fill it up with oil because I've been working on the front. If you've seen my kind of educational video, you can see I had this apart and I reinstalled my stock control arm to kind of show that stuff, but anyways, I ended up removing the front diff. It's out. I've done a little bit of cleaning, not much here per se, but I still need to clean that caliper. I've cleaned a few of the bolts and such, but not much. The main thing I've cleaned is I've cleaned my spindles. These were pretty caked with mud. Cleaned the brake shields. I did order, I don't think I've covered this yet, but this bearing, it's freed up now. You can't really hear it too much, but this thing was just, I mean, you could hear it crunching. There was, I think, some mud got into that seal. So rather than, you know, I freed it up, it seems to be spinning fairly okay. I ended up ordering two new ones. I'm just going to replace the front and both sides of the front and put new ones on. No big deal. It's just 4 bolts. They pop right off. They're not pressed in or anything, which is, they just basically just bolt right into the spindle. So when we do the reassemble, I'll go ahead and put some new wheel bearings. We'll be putting the RCVs to replace the factory front CV axles, and we should be tuning. Let's see what else. Not much has gone on here. I did get my new accessory plate here. For some reason, the one I had got previously, let me see if I can toss this in real quick. The one I had got previously was right up against the washer neck here and was actually rubbing on it. This new one clears it. It doesn't hit it. I don't know what's up with my washer's bottle, but I think it's actually, somehow it's more that way. I don't know why, but this will work. I got to drill the holes so I can reinstall the catch can. No big deal. We'll get that done. The old one, I guess I'll just hold on to because I have a feeling that's gonna hit the washer reservoir on anybody else's. Let's see what else. Finally found some satin black. It seems everywhere was out of satin black, so I can touch up the bumper a little bit. There was a couple areas that are scratched up pretty good. All right, let's come over to the front diff so I can do a little bit of complaining here. All right, so if you followed, I believe I covered it in an early video, but when I pulled the motor, I discovered that the dealership who fixed an oil leak and dropped the front diff to address that oil leak did not reattach my breather. This was disconnected. The hose was just laying on top. And during my off-roading escapades, this actually filled up with mud. It looked like the water had either evaporated. There was a little bit that came out when I drained this thing. It's been sitting for a year, so the water and the oil had time to separate. So when I opened this, a little bit of water came out, a little bit of fluid. I'm sorry, a little bit of oil, not much, because most of it was mixed with mud and was just sludged at the bottom of here inside the four-wheel drive actuator housing. It was pretty nasty. You can kind of see I've got rags everywhere, and these are actually towards the end. I threw away the ones that were just caked, but got everything cleaned up. Covers cleaned, all the parts for the axle, internal axle. This is all the new stuff. This is the 410, new bearings. I've already installed it once, but the backlash was way too high, so got to redo some shims there, and that's where we're going to come to Nitro's kit. So one of my gripes with Nitro's kit is, okay, this bearing, the front diff has an outer bearing on each side. There's a bearing on this side, a bearing on this side, and that's the CVs go in, and then that's the bearing that the CVs ride on. This bearing, it's a needle bearing, goes on this side. It gets pressed into there. And the other side is this bearing. As you can see, they are completely different. That bearing has to come out to pull the stub axle. In order to pull the carrier, you have to pull the stub axle because it goes into the carrier. And to pull that, you have to pull this seal and this bearing. This bearing and seal could probably stay in. I'm pulling it because I'm replacing it due to the mud. But there's no reason to pull that or the seal. The CV actually goes into the carrier, so once the CV's out, there's no reason to pull any of that. This is the bearing they give you in the kit. I have no idea why. They give you this bearing. They do not give you that bearing. So you have to be very careful pulling that bearing, because if you damage it, you don't get another one. I actually tried to order that bearing, and it's on a national back order with no expected delivery date. So I've had to clean this and make sure it is pristine. There doesn't seem to be any play in it. So I don't think the mud being in there caused damage to it. But we'll go ahead and have to reinstall that one. It's not too big of a deal if it does seem to cause noise or anything from the mud. It's pretty easy to replace. I don't have to pull the differential for it. You can put in a slide hammer bearing puller and just pop it out with the seal. So I'm not entirely too worried about that. My other gripe. So let me pause this for a second. I'm going to pull this pinion and show you my other gripe. Okay, I went ahead and pulled the pinion out because I kind of want to show the race. So factory, you have your race. This is just a larger shim, but you would have the race, the factory shim, and then a, what they call, I've heard it called a slinger, and it's also called an oil baffle. What that is actually a lot bigger than that. I just have a shim in there for setup. But this is it. As you can see, when you drive out the race, this is what you have to hit up against from the backside to pull the race out. As you can see, when my race was in there pretty good, so I ended up damaging this because it's only about, I think when I measured this one, it was about maybe 20 thousandths. It was about 18 to 20 thousandths thick. It's pretty thin. So, you know, a little tiny hit on it, it's pretty much foobarred. As you can see on mine, I actually ended up punching a couple holes in it because when you go to drive that out, I don't know if you could see in there. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. You can kind of see the front one. Move my hand out of the way. You can see there's not much surface area to get a punch on. That's the front one. The back one really isn't much different. Let me zoom back out here. But so my gripe with that is I have just a placeholder shim in here. It's actually one of the ones to do. This is a setup race, so I can actually pull this out. Let me try to get this thing out. Alright, that thing does not want to come out. But you could see it's loose in there, but the thing sits in there. And the purpose of that is, since this is a high pinion, if you look here, your oil level is going to sit about right here. And as you can see, the pinion is higher than the oil level. So as you drive, the oil gets slung into that hole there, which then has a pathway between the two pinion bearings and will allow oil to soak the pinion bearings, therefore lubricating them. So this piece right here is pretty important, because what it does is when it sits behind the race there, when you come to a stop, it dams the oil, therefore it stays within the pinion between the bearings, so that when you start driving, it's already got oil up inside the bearing area before it's had a chance to sling up there. They say it takes about a mile of spinning this to fill that area up with oil to properly lubricate the pinion. So if you don't have the baffle, when you stop, all that oil would drain down, and then you would have to drive another mile with unlubricated bearings until you had enough getting slung inside there. So my issue, Nitro does not give you this. I have not been able to find a part number for it. I can't find anything that's even, well, I should say, I can't find anything that measures the same as this. I have found a couple that are close. I've ordered 3 of them, different sizes for different differentials, and we're going to see which one looks like it clears the best. You can't just use a shim, like a large shim, because as you can see right here, there's a bevel. I don't have anything to make that bevel in a circle. And the whole reason that that bevel is there is because if you look at the pinion here, let's set it in there, you see the bearing cage. So if you think about it like this, I know this video is going to be, I'm trying to film this with one hand. Let me see if I can hold this better. Give me 1 second. Alright, let's see if I can do this a little better. So you can see the bevel actually pushes out, so that way that bearing cage, when you have it up against the race, there's a little bit of that cage that kind of sticks out. So that bevel is to provide enough clearance that that bearing does not rub on that baffle. You can kind of see here on the shim that I'm using, you can see the line at the bottom side. That's where that cage is actually hitting that bearing or that shim. But this is just for setup. That's a 20,000 shim to just kind of mimic while I try to get the shims set up for this while I'm waiting for parts. But that is another gripe of mine with the Nitro Gears, is they didn't include a part that is very, very hard to remove without damaging. Maybe there's some special tool I just don't have. It probably wasn't worth the cost of this thing. If they provided it, is probably, the 3 I ordered were about $3 a piece. So they, for some reason, couldn't include a $3 piece. All right. My other complaint. So factory, like I said before, shims the pinion depth behind the race. That's why I have a setup race here. So currently the factory shim is in here. Can't see it because I can't get the damn thing out. But anyways, I have the factory shim in there right now while I'm trying to set the depth. Let's come over to the kit. The kit for the front, because the rear is actually, the shims are provided to allow you to shim the pinion the same way as factory. The front, on the other hand, they give you these shims, which, if you look, do not go behind the race. So for some reason, instead of shimming behind the race like factory, they have you shimming behind the inner bearing, which I've seen setups like that, but they are usually shimmed that way from the factory. So in order to get the pinion depth, they want you to switch from these shims to these shims. Not really sure why they do that, but my plan is to do probably a combo depending on what I get. If I have to push the shim farther than factory, I will keep the factory in there and then use very, very small one of these behind the bearing, and get my depth from there. If I end up having to go less, then I'll have to take that shim out and end up using just the shims behind the bearing. I don't want to get too many of these behind the bearing. I'm not a fan of that. But that's what we're going to have to do depending on where my depth ends up. Another thing is, so it's very, very, very hard to tell, but the carrier bearings and their respective places are different. This bearing, I believe, is smaller than that side. Therefore, the shims from the factory are different sizes. I like to start out using the factory shims, kind of go from there, mainly because they're more stout. They pretty much will have it shimmed with a single shim, so it's pretty thick. I believe this side, that's probably that side, was 90 thousandths. That's a pretty thick shim, so it's a lot easier to try to install that when it has a lot more mass to it, trying to hammer it in. For this, I ended up, the backlash was so much, I was going to flip them because this side was way thicker than that side, and then it would end up pushing my carrier over and allow me to get it close. The problem is the factory shims cannot be flipped because that side is smaller and won't, I'm sorry, this side is bigger and won't fit on this side because of it being smaller. So I'm going to have to probably keep the factory on one side, and then I'm going to have to make a stack using Nitro's awesome selection. I'm being sarcastic there. But I'll have to do that, and then I'm going to have to start playing with it and basically going through all their shims. One thing else, so they give you, I haven't even tried these, so hopefully they are at least the size that they'll work on both sides. But so here's the stack Nitro gives you for the carrier. Here is the factory. This is the factory shims. You can see how thick they are. So they're really nice if you can reuse these. Hopefully I can reuse at least one of them, because one of the problems is one of these being almost 90 thousandths. The smallest shim they give you is 20 thousandths, which means that I'm going to have to work with 4 of these just to get 80 thousandths to be even close to what the factory is. And that is going to be a pain trying to feed these down in there with the bearings, trying to install the carrier. Hopefully I don't have to do it too many times, but we'll see what happens. But that is another complaint. You can kind of see, let me see if I can show you here. You can see the size difference. This is, you can see I labeled them. That's the driver's side, and there's the passenger side. But you can see they are slightly different. These will hopefully probably just be this size and have to be used on both sides. Yeah. So that's fine. We're going to have to use these ones on both sides, but that means it's going to be even harder to kind of feed them in there. But got to do with what we get. I don't have I'm not a shop, so I don't have just shims laying around everywhere, which is probably why it's not as big of a deal for an actual shop doing this. So if you take your truck to a shop, they've probably got stuff laying around to kind of pick up where the kit is lacking. I don't. I do diffs very, very, very rarely. I think the last one I've done was probably over 10 years ago. So, you know, that's probably 4 houses ago. I mean, anything left over from that I likely do not even have anymore. But yeah, so that's another complaint of mine. Wish they gave me a couple, just a couple, even 50 thousandths would be nice. That would pick it up pretty good. This one I mean, this is one of the ones they give you for the rear. I mean, that thing is pretty damn stout. So I mean, if they would have given me something this thick for the front as well, I mean, that'd be a nice starting point with a couple smaller ones to kind of make up and allow me to play with it. But I don't know why they didn't do that for the front. This front kit is like, I thought the back one was bad, but this front one is way worse. I would take the back one over this one any day. So let's see what else we've got going on. I think I've covered all that. All of the front diff. Covered all the parts. I'll probably make... Oh, another thing. If you have the ZR2 with the locker... this is where it's going to become even more of a pain. When you install this bearing cap, there is no room to get this bearing cap on with the carrier installed, which means that those bearings or those shims that I was just talking about, I'm going to have to work with the bearing cap, the race, the shims, and this bearing cap, trying to feed all of this in while also dealing with that side with a race and shims to get this down, because once the carrier is in, the fork that has to go over this notch, it does not allow you to install this after the carrier has been installed. So you have to install this at the same time as you slide the carrier down. I wish they somehow gave a little bit more room over here to allow you to slide this down, but they don't. The rear was nice. You got a little bit more room there, so you can do the bearing cap after you've kind of hammered your carrier in. But it is what it is, I guess. Can't really change it now. I mean, I'm not a GM engineer. I didn't design these, but that would have been nice, because I kind of feel bad for the shops that have to deal with that, but they probably got some type of tricks I just don't know. Somehow that got threaded. But yeah, so that's kind of a thing just to let you know about if you are planning on doing a regear yourself. The front is definitely not easy. But I'm going to go ahead and cut the video here. I'm probably going to wait till next weekend to continue doing anything else with this. It's already late Sunday and got to go back to work after the holiday. But I intend to hopefully finish this next weekend. Hopefully those parts come. I can get the setup done. Run some patterns. Hopefully the pattern's good. Hopefully my baffle, one of the ones I ordered, works. And I can replace the shim with the baffle. That way I know it's the exact size that I'll be using. Can get a good pattern. Once you get a good pattern, this thing I can reassemble. All new bearings except for the one that I cannot get. And we'll toss this thing back in the truck. And once that's in the truck, we are good. Once I get that bad boy back in, put the front back together, put the new cover on, fill it up with fluid, put the exhaust on, the wheels, and we'll be driving this thing. Hopefully the next 2 weeks. That's kind of my goal. I'm hoping next weekend will be fully devoted to the front diff. If we can get that done on Saturday, that'd be golden. because Sunday I could easily put the whole front back together, and possibly even the rear. I mean, not really much to the rear. And it'll at least be good enough that we can start it, at least move it around, start getting some idle tunes to the tuner, and get this bad boy ready to start ripping down the road. We're definitely on the home stretch now. I hope this video was informative, especially for anybody that is about to do a Nitro regear themselves. Kind of sucks, this is the only kit they make for our trucks. So if you're going to regear, you're likely going to be doing one of these kits. If you feel like taking it on yourself, just know it is pretty involved, especially with the kit. As I get things done, I'm going to kind of make up a little list of things the kit is lacking. Hopefully that helps some people. And that way, if anybody takes on the regear themselves, they'll know the couple things they need to order ahead of time. And I think that's about it. Let's see. Yeah, that'll be it. So I'll catch you guys on the next one. Sorry this one's so long.